Now that we have some more real-world JSX set up, let's go ahead and take things a step further. Right now, we have all of the tools to create a static website where the data never changes, but we're not here to learn how to build websites. We're here to learn how to build web apps where the data does change and it comes from outside sources. For example, something like a database, which we'll be doing later in the course. So what we want to do is pull out data like the name, the age, and the location. These should not be defined in our JSX. Instead, they should come from variables that we reference. That's going to allow us to reuse this, for example, across multiple users. And we're going to do the same thing up above. We're going to break out data like the title and the subtitle. We're going to focus on this one together, and you'll break this one out on your own as the challenge for this video. So to kick things off, let's just start with this right here, the name, what gets shown in the H1. Currently, it's statically defined. The only way this value is ever going to change is if you go into the JSX and you change the value. That creates JSX that is not reusable. So instead, we're going to reference a variable right here instead. The first step towards getting that done is going to be to create that variable, and we can call this whatever we like. I'm going to make a var. We'll talk about const and let in just 2 videos, and we're going to call this one user name, and we'll set it equal to a string. Now I'm going to switch up my name for a moment just so we can watch the data change in the browser. Now, how do we actually use this string Mike in the H1 instead of our current static text? Well, step 1 is to delete the static text. We no longer want that around. And step 2 is to open and close some curly braces. Now this syntax should look familiar if you've used templating languages like Mustache or Handlebars before, but it actually is slightly different. So what goes inside of here? What goes inside of here is any JavaScript expression. So for example, I can reference user name, the variable we defined up above. When we reference a variable whose value resolves to a string, that string shows up right there wherever you placed it. In our case, we placed it right inside of this H1. I'm going to take a moment to save this. We can see over here that Mike shows up, Andrew Mead is gone, and if I change this to something like Andrew, that is going to show up instead. So by adding JavaScript expressions into our JSX, we can create JSX that truly is dynamic. Now we saw that strings work, but we can actually do some cool stuff. For example, this is a JavaScript expression, so I could concatenate on an exclamation mark to add a little bit of energy to the web page. Now we get Andrew with the exclamation mark. I could also take advantage of other things like string methods. I could call to uppercase, converting Andrew to uppercase letters. Right there, it shows up as you would expect. So we have the ability to do a lot of really interesting stuff inside of these, and we're going to be looking at that extensively as we build out our applications. For now, we know one thing. If you have a string in a JavaScript expression, it just shows up. Now the same thing is true for numbers. So for example, 26. Let's go ahead and break that out into a variable instead. Right here, user age, I'm going to set it equal to a different value for the moment. I'll use 27. Then instead of having the static 26, we're going to remove it. Now notice I'm still keeping age, colon, and the space. I still want that stuff to be static. I'm always going to have that text. I just want this part to be dynamic. Right here, I open and close my curly braces, creating a new JavaScript expression. Now I could just type out the age, for example, 29, but that's basically where we started, where we have that static value. So instead, we are going to reference user age. We can save the file. 27 shows up, everything is working as expected. So there we have it. Strings and numbers, when used in a JavaScript expression in your JSX, get rendered exactly as you'd expect. I'm going to switch this back to 26 and we can move on to the final one, which is the location. I'm going to remove the static text Philadelphia and instead reference a variable that doesn't yet exist, user location. I'm going to close the curly braces and then we can create it up above. Right here, var, user location. I'm going to set that equal to a string, whatever string I want. To switch things up, I'll use a location I lived previously, New York, save the file, and right here, New York shows up inside of the template. I'm going to switch this back to Philadelphia, and there we have it. We now have a template where all of the data that changes comes from an outside source as opposed to being defined in line. This is going to be essential if we want to build any sort of dynamic web app. So we've talked about strings and we've talked about numbers, but what about something else like an object? What if we had all of this data defined on an object? Well, we can do that. Right here, let's make a variable user. I'm going to set up our object inside of the curly braces. We're going to add 3 properties, name, age, and location. Name will get set equal to the string Andrew. And we'll add a comma for that second property. Age, we'll set that equal to 26. And finally, location, I'll set that equal to Philadelphia. Now, if you reference an object inside of a JavaScript expression, things actually aren't going to work as expected. So let's take username and remove that and reference user instead. I'm going to go ahead and save things. And over here in the browser, we can see that it crashed. Currently, we have no rendered output. And if I go into the console, right here, we're getting an error. Objects are not valid as a React child. So what it's telling you is that you cannot just render an object because React has no idea what you want to do with that. Do you want to display all the property values, all of the properties with the values side by side? There is no behavior for rendering an object like there is for rendering a string and a number, but we can still use the object properties. So instead of user, I can just grab user name, user.name. Now we have completely valid JSX and we're grabbing the variable off of the user object instead of the one right here. And I can do the same thing for the other two, user.age and down below, user.location. Now we're referencing all of the data off of that object, which is pretty similar to what would happen if we fetched a user from a database. We can remove these 3 and there we have it. We have our second template getting the data dynamically injected inside, and all of that data is coming from this user object. So we've talked about strings, numbers, and objects. There are obviously a lot of other types to cover. We're going to cover those in subsequent videos. For now, it's time for a quick challenge. What you're going to do is follow similar steps from what we did down below, but you're going to do it up above for our very first template, the one that we're actually going to use as part of the indecision application. As always, I am going to outline what I'd like you to do. You're going to be creating an app object, create app object, and the app object is going to have 2 properties, title and subtitle, and both of those are going to be strings, and you can pick whatever value you like. We'll come up with good values later on. For now, any string value will work. Next up, you're going to use title and subtitle in the template. So the title is going to go right here instead of this static text, and the subtitle will go right there instead of that static text. And the last step is to render template, because currently template 2 is being rendered to the screen. When you're done, test your work. Save your file, make sure the title is showing up in the H1 and the subtitle is showing up in the paragraph down below, and use different values than these ones so you can actually watch the data change. Take some time to knock this one out, give it an honest try, and when you're done, go ahead and click play. All right, how'd that one go? This is your second challenge of many challenges. Hopefully you're getting a little more comfortable with the actual flow. So to kick this one off, I am going to create that object var app, and I am going to set up the 2 properties on that object. We can set up title first, and we can pick whatever value we like. I'm just going to use some title for the moment. And after a comma, I am also going to set up a second property on this object. That's going to be subtitle. Once again, we can pick anything. This is my subtitle. Excellent. Now that we have the data defined, we have to actually use that. First up, the H1. Right now it renders the static text. We're going to be using a JavaScript expression instead. Now, where does our data come from? Well, it comes from the app object, but we can't actually render an object. We can render strings and numbers. So let's reference that string, app.title. Excellent. And we're going to do the same thing down below. Right here, for the subtitle, we're going to grab that inside of a JavaScript expression, app.subtitle. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and remove all of the comments, which you might not have. That's fine. And we can go ahead and save app.js to test our work. Right here, we missed the last step. I never rendered the template JSX to the screen. I'm going to go ahead and switch that up. Save the file once again. And this time around, we are getting the correct title and subtitle values. Everything is working correctly. If we switch up these values, it's going to switch up what gets shown to the screen. I'm going to switch this back to indecision app. And I'll switch this one to put your life in the hands of a computer. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and save app.js. And right here, we get our title and we get our subtitle and everything is showing up correctly. So that is it for this video. We now know how to use JavaScript expressions. We know that we can render strings and numbers. We know we can't render objects. That still leaves a lot of types. In the next video, we're going to continue exploring how we can use these JavaScript expressions to create truly dynamic and useful JSX. I'm real excited to get to it. I'll see you next time.